I am super excited to announce that we have a new sponsor for the show. Interplicity is our new sponsor. They focus on wisdom for the workplace. So you know that I'm thrilled by that, of course. What is Interplicity? They offer amazing online training experiences with peer group practice communities, direct live instructor engagement, a huge amount of bite-sized on-demand content, all focused on transformative leadership and professional development. They've got programs like Leading a Coaching Culture, Emotions at Work, Leading Through Uncertainty, and one of my favorites, Resonate by Ginny Whitelaw. You might remember her from an earlier interview that we did with her on the show. Interplicity offers amazing programs, and if you want to get a $100 discount on any of the enrollments, any of the programs that you sign up for, then all you have to do is when you go to the checkout, enter in the code ZOE100. ZOE, Z-O-E 100, ZOE with a lowercase z, Z-O-E 100. And that'll save you $100 off these amazing programs. And you need to go to interplicity.com and that'll get you in. All right, there you have it.
Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learned from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hi, it's Zoe, and I have a question for you today, which is, how self-aware are you? I know, right? Well, I'm aware of myself. I know my name. I know where I'm from. But truly, do you know what drives you? Do you know what holds you back? Are you aware of where you are in the moment at any given time? Sounds ferocious, a little bit. But self-awareness is actually the most important lever for any kind of development, vertical development, horizontal development, personal development. When we start to turn our attention to who we are and how we operate, then we discover both the things that hinder us and the things that can be our superpowers. And my guest today is all about developing self-awareness. His name is Mike Normant. He is the founder of Coach Yourself Up, the author of the book of the same name and the program of the same name. And in today's episode, we take a deep dive into Mike's own personal journey from engineer through to corporate L&D trainer to running his own development business now, and some of the pitfalls and hurdles he overcame to get that and what he learned along the way and what has gone into this remarkable, fabulous program that he's got on board. All right, so let's get into it. Mike Normant, all the way from spectacular San Francisco. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Zoe. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's nice. I feel like I'm talking to relatives because I have family over in San Francisco. So not being able to travel for what seems like forever now, it's like, a little virtual check-in with life over there in the Northern Hemisphere, which is on fire at the moment, as you said, just before we clicked record.
Yeah, thankfully, we here in the Bay Area this year are not getting the bad smoke, knock on wood, yet. But Northern California, several hours to the north of us, is burning. Really, really sad.
Yeah. Well, we know all about that in Australia, and my heart goes out to everybody over in California who are facing that down. So I hope that the first responders are safe and that everybody is evacuated safely and that the forest fires get doused quickly.
Yeah, that would be nice. Some of these are projected to burn for months. And again, I think you know that story from Australia.
Yeah, I do. Well, we're gonna switch tracks quickly because I'm getting depressed thinking about it.
Let's do it.
One of the reasons I'm interested in talking with you is this whole notion of coaching yourself. And I'm a trained coach. I've been coaching people since 2002, and having another human to work with is part of the coaching premise. So I'm just burning curiosity around this. How do you think it's possible for people to coach themselves?
I'm glad you asked that question. What happened for me is I created this training program that ultimately became Coach Yourself Up. And what I found, Zoe, is as I was finished pitching it to my prospects, I'd say, essentially, I'm teaching people how to coach themselves. And as those words came out of my mouth a few times, I said, self-coaching, that's crazy. And I went and Googled the phrase, is what you do in this day and age. And wow, there were some people out there talking about this idea of self-coaching. So I said, okay, I'm not crazy. And yeah, I'm a trained coach, and I also learned the importance of having that other person that can be objective and can ask you, good perspective shifting questions. And what I came to believe and now espouse is that while it's not as awesome as working with another person, right? Many, 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 many people will never have the luxury of working with a coach. And you can learn some of the techniques that we use as coaches, mostly asking challenging questions, to drive personal change for yourself. So I've seen it work. I've applied it to myself. And coaches sometimes go, you're going to put us out of business? Absolutely not. In fact, I would say that people that have an experience of self-coaching have a higher understanding of the value of working with a coach.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to put coaches out of business.
No.
And I think when you think about it, like, we're always talking to ourselves, and self-coaching has got an aspect of that. So we're going to dive into all the detail of that, but let's rewind a little bit, So how did you get to this whole point? Because I was looking at your LinkedIn bio, and you had a degree in engineering. Is that right?
That is correct. I am a certified electrical engineer by schooling, and actually spent the first 10 or so years of my career doing technical business consulting for Anderson Consulting, which you may now know as Accenture. And about 10 years into my career there, I had a chance at trying on an HR role. And while I thought I'll do this for a year or two and then come back to this other work that I really enjoy, I fell in love with the HR work and created a career mission statement, Zoe, at the time of, I want to be in a position where I can have a significant impact on the way an organization treats its people. And as that came out of me, I realized HR is where I needed to be. And so, yeah, I spent the latter 15 years of my career primarily in learning and development, including a 5-year stretch where I ran the global function at eBay while they grew from 2,000 to 10,000 employees, and then had a number of significant personal challenges that happened roughly 10 years ago now that led me to take what I thought would be a break from the corporate world that turned into a year of personal transformation, and ultimately heading out on my own to try to share some of the things I experienced with others.
Okay, well, there's lots of juicy things in your story there I want to pick apart, if that's okay.
Sure. Pick away.
We'll come back to the personal transformation story, because that sounds amazing. eBay, so going from 2,000 to 10,000, and you're heading up the L&D HR function. Was it the L&D or the HR? It was L&D.
It was L&D. I reported to the head of HR, so it was just learning and development. We'll keep my mountain small.
What did you learn about that kind of massive growth in personnel?
That's a great question. What I learned is that it's what's the old drinking from a fire hose. It was like constantly drinking from a fire hose, and so the need as the company got bigger and bigger to start putting in more guardrails, right, more expectations, if you will, around what are we looking for from our leaders? What are we looking for from our managers? What are the behaviors that we're driving to? We had a set, of core behaviors that supported the eBay values, and started building out our development around that. But I think the biggest thing was providing more structure. And of course, there were lots of people that were not wanting the structure. And as the company got bigger, it was time for them to move on, to go to something smaller where they could be a little more carefree and guardrail free, if you will. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm always curious about that experience. I mean, 2,000 people is a big-ish company anyway.
Yeah.
Going to 10,000 is magnitudes larger. And what it's like to steer the L&D ship and watch people survive, not survive, thrive, not thrive in that kind of environment. So I think that's a useful frame, the guardrails and expectations. And in some ways, you need that. You need the boundaries and parameters to help people to interact better. But there is a heaps more flexibility in smaller organizations. You can be far more autonomous, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and we, when was it? Probably as we hit around 7,000 or 8,000 people, realized that we needed to be doing more to create that extended leadership group, if you will, the hundreds of senior directors and above that were, having big influence in the organization. And we created a program called Leadership eBay, where we brought 25 leaders from around the world together, pre-COVID, way back then, where, the networks that were formed, the connections, people from different parts of the world, from different aspects of the business, all learning this common approach to what the company was looking for in their leaders, right? And a lot of it, and this would not surprise you, people from the outside would look, oh, it's a Leadership eBay 5-day program. I'll bet it's all about strategy and vision and that kind of thing. It was exclusively about how to behave, how to interact with people, right? It was, using your phrase, it was all about the people stuff. It was all about the people stuff.
That is fascinating. And I'm often surprised too, is that that leaders actually find the strategy stuff way easier and feel more comfortable with it than the people dynamics. And that's the emphasis where a lot of leaders want to go, is they want to understand and be better at engaging with others. All right. So yeah, leadership is always about, like, if I say navel gazing, it sounds so disparaging, but self-reflection is probably a better part of that.
Yes, I like self-reflection.
No, it's a big part of your program, which we're coming to. Tell me about your personal transformation, Mike. Like, this sounds like you can't just dangle that in front of me and not expect me to go there. What happened?
Yes, that was on purpose. If you use those big words, somebody will check in. Yeah, it was interesting. As I said, I took what I thought was going to be a couple months off to recharge my batteries after having a number of challenging personal situations in my life, including the passing of my mom. And I ended up going to various personal growth workshops. I joined a men's consciousness group, which at the time I had to ask, what is consciousness? And
Mike, how do you explain that now? Because people are going to be like, what is consciousness? Like, how do you define consciousness?
The very simple answer that was given to me that I now give back is it's self-awareness.
Okay.
Right? It's being more aware of how you fit into the bigger picture, how you're showing up, how you're interacting with others. Certainly consciousness also, starts to expand beyond the self and being aware of one's surroundings and aware of others and empathy and those kind of things. But it's awareness, maybe is a better way. Maybe instead of self-awareness, it's awareness. But so I ended up going to a workshop for a weekend and was telling the instructor that I couldn't do a certain thing because I'm not a risk taker. And she looked me in the eye and she said, "That's a story." And I was like, no, it's not. Right? Like, I know me. I'm 47 years old at the time. And I was like, I'm not a risk taker. It's a fact. And she helped me be open to the possibility that was a story, which was the beginning of what I'm doing now, which led me to start challenging those beliefs I had about myself around risk taking, to starting to experiment with small risks. And this idea sort of came out of that of, wow, you can take these small baby steps, you can make small shifts. And the next thing you know, 6 or 9 months later, there's Mike the risk taker, who for 47 years believed he was not and could not take risks. And so that was an example of a number of similar things like that literally by the end of that year off, I was a very different person. And what's interesting is I always considered myself, I was the head of learning and development. I thought I was very self-aware. And I think at some level I was compared to the average bear. But wow, so much more to learn about myself. And now I know there's still many layers to peel back, but feel like I'm pretty aware of how I'm showing up in general.
Does it surprise you, Mike, now what those layers are? Or let me change the question a little bit. What is it like when you discover a new layer for yourself? If you consider yourself fairly self-aware, what's it like when you come up against a new awareness?
It's a great question. I think it's a combination of excitement and disbelief's not the right word. Like there's that moment of really, and then there's like, oh yeah, but that's the way this is played, right? It's, of course there's more, of course there's new things. And so it's not as surprising as it used to be, as I'm now fully expecting that you never know around the next corner what's going to pop up and say, hey, guess what? Here's something that you're doing. And sometimes it's the same old, same old. So for example, another one of my patterns is people pleasing, right? And I have shifted really far around taking care of myself, putting my own needs first, those kind of things. But there will be situations I'll find myself in where I'll walk out of the room and go, oh my God, I just did that so that other person would like me. It had nothing to do with what I was, my point of view. And so, you slide back periodically for sure. Because, hey, we it's 40 some odd years in percolation, right? So it's not something that you just flip a switch and now you're different. It's something that it's constant work.
So let's check in around this self-awareness piece, because self-awareness is not just unveiling unhelpful patterns. It's also unveiling potential superpowers. Like you just described two situations. One was a superpower where you learned how to be a risk taker. And then another one was unhealthy patterns of being a people pleaser. So let's talk a little bit about the self-awareness piece, because I know it's one of the key pillars in your Coach Yourself Up program. Tell us about your approach to that. How do you encourage people to develop self-awareness? And I get this question a lot, actually, from leaders. Like, how do I help myself get self-awareness, and how do I get my people to develop self-awareness?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so it's interesting. The phrase that I would use that can, some people are like, what is that? I use the phrase self-observation. And this idea of observing yourself. And that can be something that feels a little awkward. But when I can put it in context and give people some activities around, for example, one of the doorways in, for sure, in my work is working on managing your attention, right? And I've got some very cool content around attention that helps people start to see their attention in a new way, right? We're used to our attention. I like to say our attention just is. We don't often pause to think about what is my attention doing, and the fact that if I start to pay attention to my attention, I realize that I'm not always in control of my attention. My attention moves without me.
Oh, you only have to meditate or try to meditate to notice that.
Exactly. But not everyone's tried to meditate. So this idea of pay attention to your attention, and as you start to learn, I have this notion of the geography of attention, where your attention can be in one of three places. It can be in your body, it can be in your world through one of your five senses, or it can be in your mind. And oftentimes when you're in your mind, you're either in the past or in the future. As people start to get a little more familiar with the territory of attention, it then becomes a little bit of an easier step to pay attention to yourself. And when you're sitting in a meeting, listening to the people talking, you can periodically bring that attention to, Am I in the meeting? Am I paying attention to people? Am I feeling nervous? I can start to think, I can start to say, wow, I'm feeling like I don't know if I belong here. And oftentimes we just sort of float through our day. I use the word autopilot. We'll sit in that room, we'll feel like we don't belong there, but we're not really paying attention to that. And is that serving me? Is that something that maybe I can work on? Yes. So over the course of the various steps that I have, it's sort of, a process of, try this and then this and then this. And the outcome for me is people are now able to pay attention to themselves, to their behavioral patterns, to their thought patterns. You talk about vertical development a lot, and this idea of starting to become aware of the filters that are working and to recognize that I'm, adding layers of context onto the facts that are on the ground. And so it's just like this slow building awareness puzzle that I start to fill in. And there is, and I don't know if you've had this experience, right, where I don't know exactly how to say it, right, but like a year down the road, it's just a new normal, and it's almost hard to remember what it was like before. Like I have a hard time remembering 10 years ago and what it was like to not be as aware. And everything was fine, but I just know that I'm in a different place now.
I have little memory glimpses of what it was like before I started doing deep work for myself, before I had my own coach, which kicked off my whole business development journey. And I remember being reactive. I remember people saying things and I'd have like an emotional reaction and living that reaction as the truth. So, they said something that, that's a terrible thing. And and not being aware at all of the emotions within my body, or that I was processing it, or I was putting meaning to it. Somebody said something, I responded or reacted to it because it just came through the top of my consciousness and made a snap judgment about that and just spat out a reaction or a judgment. So I remembered those, a few, like just being just volatile and being at the whim of my emotions all the time. And I remember maybe I remember because I got a piece of feedback around this that was written by my boss from summer camp in my final assessment for the summer. And he said, "You're very emotional." And I read that. I'm like, what does he mean? I'm very emotional. I'm like, oh my God, there it was. And the roller coaster of emotions was how I was. And I got some feedback around that, which made me pause for a moment. And that was like, I guess, one of the first pieces of self-awareness that I toyed with. So I remember that volatility. It's like skimming on the surface of who you are as opposed to plumbing the depths.
Yeah. Yeah. And likewise, I can think back to, for me, it's more conceptual. Like I know that through my late 40s, I avoided all risks because I had this belief that I wasn't a risk taker. It's hard for me to go back and remember, oh man, when I was 43, that one thing that came up, I wish that I had already realized I could take risks. I would have loved, like that level of detail is sort of gone in general. But your point about reaction, that is absolutely one of the phrases I use. In fact, the third step of my 3-step self-coaching path is being response-able, being responsible, the ability to choose an intentional response as opposed to succumbing to our more habitual reactions, right? So 100%.
So 3 steps. Let's talk about your 3 steps. The first one is?
The first step is strengthening attention, which I mentioned a little bit already, just becoming more aware of our attention and what it's up to. And that prepares the way for the second step, which is self-observation. And so in my model, so you mentioned self-awareness is not just about, call it limits. That's the piece that I'm mostly teaching, is from my experience of seeing how I had put these artificial boundaries around myself, being able to identify those and move through those. And so through a process of self-observation, starting to pay, it's identify a behavior that you'd like to shift. Sample self-limiting behaviors like I'm not a good listener, I can't say no. That's a common one. People keep saying yes to everything, and I don't speak up in meetings, right? There's a number of things where people's behaviors are holding them back, if you will. And then the trick is to cultivate a self-observation practice where you start to pay attention to the behavior to start to get more clarity on what's going on, right? And as the brain, right, the neuroscience says that when you start to say, I'm reflecting on this particular behavior, the brain says, oh, you want to pay more attention to this, I'll bring it to your attention sooner and sooner. And then I can start understanding what are the stories that sit underneath that, right? I'm not speaking up in meetings. And if I had 10 people that weren't speaking up in meetings, instead of, hey, start speaking up, the classic fix, it's start paying attention. What's going on? What's preventing you from speaking up, right? Is it that you feel like you're going to be judged harshly? Is it that you feel like you don't belong in the room? And once we have that underlying story, I say we can do the inner work to support the outer change, which is I can start challenging that story, that belief, like the belief I had around not taking risks. I can start to poke through that, start to experiment with, in this case, speaking up, and pick a safe meeting. Don't pick the biggest meeting you have with the CEO. Pick a team meeting and start to speak up a little bit and see, are those things you're afraid of, do they happen? Most of the time they don't. And that starts to, the brain says, wait a minute, maybe the story I have that's holding me back is a story and it's not a fact.
So do you do any somatic work through these processes? Meaning that I'm wondering if it's part of the attention phase. Developing attention is paying attention to what's happening in your body as a clue to some other stuff that's going on. Do you do that kind of work as part of it?
So what's interesting on that, Zoe, is that I'm much more of a head guy, and head and heart maybe more than body. And that's reflected in my program. And so I'm not as strong on the body piece as I could be. And part of that is it's not my strength. It's not my forte. Maybe a self-limiting belief around not being able to teach that. I don't know. But absolutely, when we're working on attention, I do talk about being in your body. I do when we talk about triggers, right? So so for example, you might have, somebody has these emotional reactions to things. Can you start to pay attention to what triggers are? And those triggers might be in your body, right? It might be your palms get sweaty or your heart starts beating, that kind of thing. But it's pretty surface level in my work that I go into body. If somebody were to say, wow, Mike, this is great, and I'm really interested in learning more about the body aspect of this, I would point them to a number of various folks that are experts in the somatic area.
I'm curious now also, Mike, about restructuring beliefs and relayering. So you talked about poking holes in people's stories or their limiting beliefs. How do you go about poking the holes in the limiting beliefs?
Yeah, so I have a series of questions, and by the way, I'm not sure I went through all three steps, but right, strengthening attention, self-observation, and then the third step is being responsible. And part of that is the idea is that in that self-observation phase, you've identified the primary story that sits under your limiting behavior. And in the third step, being responsible, there is a specific set of 5 questions that I have that people can ask themselves to challenge their stories. And, they have to do with, how do I know this story is true? Are there other possible stories that could be constructed from the same data? If I didn't believe this story were true, how might I act differently? And for me, that's a really powerful one. If I didn't believe that I was not a risk taker, how might I act differently? And then there's a yes/no question that says, would it serve you to act that way? And the intention is for that to be a resounding yes, and that's triggering the brain. I'm not sure if you're familiar with intentional change theory that says we're more likely to make a change if it's in service of becoming a more ideal version of ourselves as opposed to trying to fix something about our current self. And so if I'm aspiring to be a great listener as opposed to trying to stop interrupting people. Right. It's like
as I just interrupt you.
Yeah. No, it's perfect. And then the last question is, how will I experiment with acting differently? Which is worded in such a way that it leads to an action item. And then I sort of alluded to this a minute ago, but I then have what I call, and this is a jumble of words, but it's the experimentation staircase. And so if we go to that example of I don't speak up in meetings, I can think about what are the meetings that I'm regularly in and sort of put them on this mythical staircase of low stakes, medium stakes, high stakes. Start on the lower stair of the lower stakes meetings. Start getting experimenting. And the word experiment is really intentional, because if you think about it as an experiment, you think about a scientist conducting an experiment, there's never a failure.
Yeah, it's clever.
Right? There's always data that's revealed, information that's revealed. So even if it doesn't turn out the way I want it to, if I'm holding it as an experiment, I don't need to beat myself up. I can say, oh, that's really interesting. That was interesting data. That's an interesting outcome. How might I try it a little bit differently next time? But most of the time, these things work, and we're disproving our stories, finding out they're not as truthful as we thought they were.
I like the experimentalist approach around this, because I was thinking it's some other belief-changing work I've done where you adopt a new belief, and then you're like, all right, as someone who has this belief, this is what I do now. And it sounds very regimented and it's all or nothing kind of thing. But an experimentalist approach is you give yourself permission to put new wiring in place with the experiments, try something, get more information. If it works, carry on kind of thing. So it's less pressure on yourself, I think.
Yeah, and you're prompting me to want to share one of my engineering things that I do, and I'm going to go for it. I mentioned earlier, I said the phrase, small shifts lead to big changes. And just exactly as you said, I think one of the biggest barriers for so many people to even trying this kind of work is this notion that, oh my God, it's either impossible or it's going to be so hard or it's such a big thing. And so this idea of, hey, you can take baby steps. You can take these little small incremental steps that over time will have a huge impact. And I talk about a trajectory, a career or life trajectory. And if you can picture potential realized on the vertical axis and time on the horizontal axis. And so here's somebody who, let's say they interrupt a lot, and you can sort of project out what's that future trajectory for them look like, career and life, if they don't work on becoming a better listener. And yet, if they start making very small incremental shifts in trying to become a better listener, that arc, that trajectory starts to bend up toward more potential. And I heard a really cool example once when somebody said, if you think about it, so I use that phrase, bend your future. And if you think about it, if I'm in a meeting and I say something, and my normal pattern would be to not say anything, like literally the future from that point on is different than it would have been had I not said anything. I don't know how significantly, but each of these little moments it changes the future. It's different than it would have been.
Is that quantum physics? Is it sliding doors? It's a bit like that, though.
It is. It is a little bit, yes.
When you choose to do something different outside of your normal pattern, you put a schism in place. James Clear talks a little bit about this, in his work, Atomic Habits, where, every little choice is a vote for your future or to maintain the same.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
I like that as a concept,
Me
it's
too.
like, what future am I voting for right now with this action?
Yes, I like that.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about the program that you've got on Interprofessional. So Interplicity is the sponsor of the show, and I'm really excited to bring you to the listeners and to talk about your program there because you have Coach Yourself Up on the platform. So what is it like? Who is it for, and who's best suited to it?
Yeah, I love that question. I'm being a little bit sarcastic because the answer I'm going to give sounds so it's for everyone. We have individuals who are interested in self-improvement, who are looking and thinking that it would be great to shift some of their, get some of their self-limits knocked down. And in the corporate world, I created this with the frontline employee in mind. And the reason for that, I'm going to go a little off tangent here. Having sat in the chair, having led leadership development, learning and development, et cetera, I always found it fascinating that we talk about how important self-awareness is, which, as you know, with your vertical development work, it's like self-awareness is like so important. And yet we really don't start taking proactive steps to help shine the light on people until they're very senior in an organization with 360 feedback, with working with a coach. And it's like, I'm thinking, man, how cool would it be if we just pushed that down to all these hungry frontline employees that are interested in learning more about themselves? And so that was the design target audience and I thought corporate was really where I wanted to take this because there's so many people. Like if I want this self-awareness, this rise in self-awareness to have an impact in the world, right, on societies, et cetera, going through corporations makes sense as a big, audacious goal. That said, we have a client we're talking to right now who literally today said they want to sign a deal to take 150 of their most senior female leaders and put them through a private cohort of Coach Yourself Up. And so it resonates at any level. And the experience, back to your question, it's 6 weeks. It's a cohort experience. There are lots of bite-sized learning videos, journaling, reflection exercises, reading, etc. And there's also discussion forums, right? So there's a like I said, there's a cohort. We'd have anywhere from 50 to 100 to a couple hundred people. Obviously, in the future, we're hoping for bigger numbers. We're doing the 50 thing today, I'd say, and we have accountability teams. People can sign up to be in groups of 3 that touch base during the program and help to hold each other accountable for doing the work. We ask every individual to choose a specific self-limiting behavior of their own. It's not like, hey, everybody, let's work on this. It's pick one for yourself and let's start applying the tools and work through the process. And we have three live calls during the program. So there is, this 1 hour live call for people that can attend in person, or they can listen to the recording if they're not able to make it live, where we talk about how people are experiencing the program, what questions they have, et cetera. It's a very robust experience. We're getting rave reviews. And like I said, I'm really bullish for the future of Coach Yourself Up becoming a thing.
Oh, it sounds like a buzz to do it. I mean, peeling back the layers and discovering more about yourself, and so that you're less reactive and more response able, I think is fabulous. Where can people find more out about you, Mike, and your work?
Yeah, I just point them to coachyourselfup.com, my website. I would also, at this moment in time, August 31st, 2021, say that my website is on its last legs and we're in the process of building a new one. So maybe look with one eye at the quality of the actual site, but that's where you can find out. And there's a link there to the Interplicity online course, and you can find out more about the book. And if you hear this in a month, there'll be a brand new website up. It'll look great.
Well, I had a look at your website today. I think it looks fine. So I'm excited to think what you think the new one's going to look like.
Cool.
Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your stories, your journey, and the fabulous insight that you've got. I'm really excited for Coach Yourself Up. I think this is a tremendous resource, and I'm looking forward to reading the book too.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Zoe. It's been a pleasure.
Well, it's no secret that I loved this interview. I love talking about self-awareness and discovering more things about yourself. Doing a deep dive into who you are and what you want and how to get there is something I've made a living of and a passion expression of since, 20 plus years. And I love discovering new things about it. And what did I learn today? It was intentional change theory. I love that. I did not know this, that we are more likely to make positive, effective change if we are living into a positive version of ourselves rather than trying to fix a flaw. I love that. That's really powerful. My friend Digby Scott has this exercise called a little me and big me, which is a little bit like that. It's the big me picture is like, who are we trying to evolve into? So I love that. Intentional change theory was one of the big takeaways for me on this one. And if you liked the conversation or are intrigued by the work of Coach Yourself Up, we will put a link in the show notes to where you can go directly to the course and you can check it all out for yourself. And if you want to save $100 on Mike's fabulous program, all you have to do is enter in Zoe100 into the coupon code as you check out. It's ZOE and the numbers 100, Zoe100 at the checkout. And that'll save you $100 off that course and any of the other courses that you may choose to undertake at the Inner Professional. All right. Well, I hope you have yourselves a wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. And by the way, if you haven't signed up to get email notification of these episodes, do so. Go to our site, zoerouth.com, click on podcast. You can sign up to get notifications, and all the easy links will be in there, so you don't have to fumble around into your podcast listening platform. It's just all there, right and ready and easy for you. Okay, you know what comes next? Live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.